My name is Arthur Cage. I'm from Wichita. Blue collar all my life. Metal roof installs in summer, shop work and welding in winter. I'm not a storyteller. I cook on weekends, cast iron stews and whatever I can throw together after a long day. But I don't go looking for weird things. I don't chase ghosts. I don't want attention. I just want you to understand why I don't sleep right anymore and why I won't set foot on a ranch again in winter. We were four. Me, Danny, who runs a small landscaping crew, Jared, a quiet guy who fixes garage doors, and Louis, who moved down to Wichita from Cheyenne a few years back. We'd planned the trip because Louis had a line of foreclosed ranch outside Casey, Wyoming, Johnson County, the flat country that runs up to the Bighorns. Some family friend of his was thinking of buying it, and we were the capable hands who'd go up for a long weekend and see how bad the place was. In winter, you see the bones of property, the sagging fences, the way the snow piles against outbuildings, the wind paths, the rutting around gates. You can tell if it's worth saving. We left Wichita on a bright Friday in January, the kind of cold that makes your nose sting the second you leave the truck. The forecast said sunny and clear, which feels like mercy until you get out there and the sun just makes the snow into broken glass, glittering everywhere. Wyoming seems open on a map, but on the ground it's a maze of arroys and cottonwoods and fence lines running to nowhere. We arrived at the ranch late afternoon. The sign on the county road was tilted. Bullet holes clocked through the family name, so it just read RRO Creek. The driveway cut a line between two drifts and wound past a wind-pumped stock tank that had frozen over clean. The ranch house sat on a rise, paint scabbed, and a porch that had slumped like a tired back. Two barns, one nearer the house, gray boards and a tin roof, another farther out along a line of cottonwoods with a corral half collapsed. Looks like a fixer, Danny grinned from the driver's seat, but his voice was flat. He's a joker by nature. He wasn't joking. Louis said, "Lockbox on the side door. We've got power, maybe. Water's probably a no." The place had that empty smell, cold wood, mouse nests, maybe old oil on the floor. You know how some houses keep a little of their people? This one held mostly the wind. We got a fire going in the wood stove, with the last of the old split logs in the lean-to. The electricity coughed and blinked, but came up. I started to pot beans, onions, a bit of bacon I'd brought in a cooler. I cook when I'm nervous. It's a thing. We walked the property before dusk, crunching across the hard crust and stepping where the sage poked through so we wouldn't drop a boot into a hidden hole. There were tracks, deer of course, rabbit, coyote. I pointed to a set of prints that came down the arroyo and skirted the closer barn. "Coyote," Jared said. I nodded, but the gate was odd in places, like it had dropped into a kind of loop and then straightened. I brushed my glove over the prints and felt a ripple of cold down my neck that didn't belong to the air. We didn't stay out long. You don't linger in that kind of wind. It wasn't howling. It wasn't much of anything. Just this constant thin pressure you had to push your body through. We went back in. I stirred the pot and pretended the smell of dust wasn't threaded through everything. While we ate, Louis talked about the price per acre and the owner. An oil-field hand who tried hobby ranching and then bailed. Property tax chewed him up, he said. You can tell he loved it though. Look at the way he placed the outbuildings. He followed the wind lines right. Jared said nothing for a while, then asked, You hear coyotes? We all paused, spoons halfway to mouths. I did hear them. Then, way out, a braided sound unraveling in the cold. I've heard coyotes my whole life. High yips and that laughing tone. These sounded hungry. That's a stupid way to describe a sound, but it's what I felt. Like they were pecking at your attention from the edges. You get a lot of coyote out here, Louis said. Yeah, Danny said, but we should make sure no doors are hanging open in the barns. If something bedded down in there, we'll chase it out now, not at 2 in the morning. After we eat, I said, because the beans had just started to thicken, right where the bacon fat gave them that shine. Dinner warmed us, but my hands ached when I pulled on my gloves again. We grabbed flashlights and a couple of tools. Jared took his big framing hammer like it was a talisman. Danny had a battered 12 gauge we'd used to scare birds off a job site once. No idea why he'd tossed it in for this trip, but we were grateful for the feel of it. Louis took a fencing tool. I tucked my chef's knife into my belt because it felt familiar. You carry what you know. We started with the nearer barn. Our boots made that rubber squeal sound on old snow. The moon was up, torn white coin, and we didn't actually need the lights until we stepped into the barn's throat. The light cut out a yellow cone. Dust hung in it, slow and soft. Hello? Danny said reflexively, like you do when you enter someone's space. His voice came back odd, like the barn was wider than it looked. We walked the aisle between stalls. A swallow's nest, a dead summer home, clung to a rafter. I smelled something off, a wet bitter note under the sawdust. Coyotes use barns sometimes, sure, but the smell had a wrong edge. Louis shone his light into a corner and swore softly. The snow that had blown in under the sliding door held tracks. They came in from the outside, circled, and then went right up against a wall. We all saw it. You don't need to be a tracker. Pads, claws, dog. Then, as they pushed against the wall, the prints elongated. The final 3 were longer, with suggestion of a heel. The stride changed, and then nothing. No prints out, just a scuff on the lower boards of the wall, like something had braced a hand there. Coyotes don't do that, Jared said, quiet. I could feel him pull inside himself, get smaller. I had a thought. I didn't speak. I'd watched YouTube videos late at night about things I don't want to name. Navajo stories, mostly. They don't belong to me or my people or my place. The videos were trashy, sensational, voiceover guys with reverb and grainy photos. But some of them, the ones that stitched clips of late-night mimicry and wrong-way coyote tracks, they'd got under my skin, and standing there, I wished I'd never clicked a single one. We heard it outside then, a whistle, low and lazy, like a ranch hand getting a horse's attention. From the darkness beyond the barn door, Louis raised his light and Danny brought the shotgun up. We made a little knot, a stupid brave knot of 4. "Hey," a voice said. My voice. I heard my own tone, the way I stretch the E when I'm tired. "Arthur, come out." It wasn't perfect. If you ever heard your voice on a bad phone recording, it had that too. But it was close enough to make my back teeth hurt. Danny said very softly, "Don't answer." No one did. We stood there with the hay dust in our throats and the white cone of light making flowers of notes. And we didn't breathe much. I could hear my own pulse. The voice came again, a little more impatient. "Arthur, come out here. Found something." I don't know what would have happened if we'd called back, or if I'd done the movie stupid thing and stormed into the yard with my knife in my hand. But we didn't. We backed out together. We slid the barn door closed and dropped the pin. We made it to the house without speaking and barred the kitchen door with a length of oak Louis found in a corner. It fit the brackets like someone had made it for exactly that purpose. I stirred up the stove just for something to do with my hands. Jared stood by the window, not peeking, just standing there like a sentry. We lay down in our sleeping bags in the living room, the stove popping, our boots by our heads in case we needed to run. We had the shotgun and a couple boxes of shells. I pulled my beanie low and tried to pretend the shadows were just furniture. Somewhere past midnight, the wind died completely. That's the worst kind of quiet. Every old board has a voice when it's that still. I heard the porch creak once and then, clear as morning, Danny's voice called from outside the kitchen door. "Art, you awake?" Danny was lying 5 feet away from me in his bag, snoring soft, making that whistling noise through a half-stopped nose. The next voice was higher, a little raw at the edges. A woman. "Please, please," she said, as if she'd been crying for an hour. "I'm cold." I felt something fold in my chest. The brain moves so fast. There's a straight line of cause. Someone out there. We have heat. We open. We help. Then the other line. We are in a winter-locked county with no sign of any human for miles. Who walks to a ranch at midnight in January without a headlamp or the steady crunch of boots? And then the third, more poisoned line. Those damned videos, the ones with the audio of a voice calling from a fence line, wrong, just a shade wrong. The woman's voice knocked 3 times on the door, not the wood that would be reachable to a human standing on the porch, higher, 3 deliberate taps, the top third of the door. Louis pulled his bag over his head, like that could keep the sound out. Jared's eyes were wide and flat. Danny put a finger to his lips and mouthed, "No." We didn't move. The voice tried again, quieter, closer. "Please." The porch creaked. Something stepped back into the yard. We made it to the morning without opening that door. I'm not going to dress it up. It was just stubbornness and fear, and the stove and the glow of our phones on low power mode, and 4 men pretending to be logs. Jared dozed and jolted like a dog in a dream. I stayed awake and watched the window. Once, at the loosening edge of light, I saw a shape pass by, tall as a man, too narrow at the joints. stooped like something learning a body it didn't own. When the first mean stripe of sun cut the horizon, we moved. People talk about the safety of daylight like it's an absolute. It isn't, but it's a drug that will get you out the door. We ate cold beans with plastic spoons and we didn't say much while we packed. Louis said, "We go now. I don't care about inspecting the farm barn. I don't care about checking the well. We go." We loaded the trucks. I slammed the tailgate and looked out toward the cottonwoods. There was a shirt hanging on a broken board off the corral fence. A red flannel torn up one sleeve. It wasn't ours. It was old, sun-faded and weather-scabbed. But it looked placed, and in the snow below it, prints in two directions. Coyote pads leading in, and long prints, heel struck, leading out, as if something had stood there and dressed itself in a memory. Danny said my name. When I turned, he wasn't looking at me. He was looking past me at the second barn. The door stood open like a mouth. "The wind," Jared said. Nothing in the words. "There's no wind," Louis said. We were stupid then, but I don't know if I'd do it different. We couldn't face leaving that open. In and out, Danny said. He dumped shells into the shotgun. I slid the chef's knife back into my belt and grabbed a road flare from the truck. A flare throws a lot of light in a barn. That was my thought. I wanted to see everything at once. We crossed the yard, bread smoking like we were little trains, and we went into the second barn. It was darker and older. The sun came through knotholes and made coins on the packed earth. The smell punched me. Something dead, old, wet hair, a metallic note. Not just coyote, not just mouse. The far end had a loft and a ladder missing its bottom 3 rungs. And there was something in the loft. I didn't see it full. I saw the vertical line of a shin where a shin shouldn't be, an ankle joint bending backwards, fingers not quite curling because they were too long, too pale, knuckles like knots. It flowed back, fast and careful, like smoke that remembered being a person. I yanked the cap on the flare. It spit white fire and then burned steady, hard red. The light washed the barn, and what had been dark corners weren't. The thing made a sound like green wood cracking in a hot fire and streaked across the loft. It was too fast. People can be fast. Animals can be faster. This was like the distance was wrong for the time it took. It got to the loft's open edge and dropped. That was the worst part. It didn't climb or scramble. It folded and felt and caught itself halfway down on a post with fingers and the arch of a foot, as if gravity was a game. Its head cocked. I'm not going to describe its face beyond this. If you've ever seen a coyote with mange, emaciated, hairless patches, yellow eye shine in your light, now stretch it, thin it, lift the cheekbones, and put it under a skin that doesn't fit right, like a kid wearing a wet shirt 2 sizes too small. Its mouth was wrong, too many ways to open. Jared swung the hammer without thinking. It was a good swing, a heavy, honest blow from a man who'd driven nails in blizzards. The thing moved and the hammer clipped the post. The shock ran up Jared's arm and he yelled. Danny fired. The shot was loud enough to cleave the air. Splinters laced the post. The thing ripped. There's no other word for it. Ripped the board loose, tore it free like wet cardboard and threw it across the aisle. It skimmed my chest and hit the wall hard enough to stick an old rusted nail 2 inches into the plank. The thing dropped the rest of the way and moved through us. I don't remember the exact seconds. I remember the feel of it sliding past, cold as outside air and smelling like mulch and iron. I remember Jared's coat tearing one clean line down the back like a box cutter, and blood spotting the denim beneath. I remember Louis slamming the flare into the thing's shoulder, and the way the firelight shaped details of it, making it more and less all at once, like I was looking through it into something thinner than any animal should be. It screamed without breath, flat and wide like metal sheet torn too slow. We all moved at the same time, that panicked herd motion that decides a life. Danny fired again. Pellets took off corn-sized bits of roof tin. My knife met something that didn't have the give of flesh and yet wasn't bone. Imagine cutting through tough hide, but the hide is also your memory of something's shape. I cut air and still felt a drag on the blade. The thing shoved with a strength that was all mislaid leverage. Jared went to a knee and came up with a handful of dirt, like he wanted to punch the floor itself. Louis jammed the lit flare up under the thing's jaw and held it there, screaming right into its face. Not words, just the human sound you make when your life's being skinned. It ripped again. This time it was wood. 2 stall boards came off under its hands like it was peeling fruit. It made a shape behind them that was almost a door and used it. It was outside, quick and slick, into the white glare. We didn't chase. I need you to know that. The part of every stupid story when they chase. We didn't. We grabbed Jared, checked the wound. Long, shallow, could have been a mercy or a warning, and moved in a tight knot back toward the house. The flare burned hard in my hand, and I carried it like a flag. I didn't look anywhere but the line of the door. The yard was different in daylight. The old tracks looked older. The shadows knew where to stand, but there were new prints in the snow where there shouldn't have been any. Prints that came in under fence rails nobody could fit, and places where the prints in coyote shape ended and long man-heel prints began. The switchbacks were playful. That's the word that came to me, sick as it felt. Playful. Like it was making itself a puzzle and we were the pieces. Inside, we locked the door again, shoved the table against it for theater, and started packing the last of our gear. Jared hissed once when I poured vodka over his back, best disinfectant we had. Danny kept saying, "Okay, okay," in a loop like a prayer. Louis's hands shook when he loaded the last shells. "Truck keys," he said. "We go, now." "Frozen ruts on the drive," Jared said through his teeth. "If we stick..." "He won't," Danny said, and I believe he didn't. Fate can make a machine do more work than it wants to. We got as far as the first turn. The sun made everything bright, but it wasn't warm. The drifts along the road were crusted, hard and glazed. Danny's truck broke through the first 2 crusts and then dropped the left rear into a pocket. We rocked it. We laid cut boards under the tire, We did the math and the work. It wouldn't come. The other truck idled as I could feel it wanting to roll if anything at all touched it wrong. The ranch waited around us. That's what it felt like the place itself had folded arms. I was at the back tossing gravel under the tire when I heard it again. Not a voice this time. Whistling. It came from the cottonwoods, and it wasn't a tune so much as a pattern. 3 notes, pause, 3 notes. It moved while it whistled. I felt the hair go up along my arms inside my coat. Jared looked at me and I looked at him, and neither of us said what we were thinking. The whistle came closer and then stopped. Silence isn't empty. It's as crowded as a bus station. This one was packed. Flare, Louis said. I popped a second one. The first was still searing a little hole in the daylight from where we'd left it in the barn. But this one felt heavier in my hand, like it knew it had work to do. I held it high. The smoke curled gray and red up past my glove. Danny climbed back into the driver's seat and tried to rock the truck again. Reverse, drive, reverse, gentle on the gas, steering wheel turning with his shoulders. The tire grabbed and then chewed into the board and threw it out behind, and for a second the back end hopped, and we all yelled because we thought he'd got it. Then it settled lower. I heard my name, soft, like the way my mom used to say it when she was waking me up for school. Arthur. I didn't answer. Every part of me wanted to. That's the worst of it. That part of your brain that moves before everything else. That part that says, "Who needs me?" Arthur, the voice said again. It was close. It came from the right, where the yard sloped down into the arroyo, and the cottonwoods were a mess of sticks. It sounded under the top layer of branches, not above or beyond, but threaded inside. Louis said, "Don't." I didn't know if he was telling me or telling the air. A shape moved between 2 trunks. Tall, narrow, joints not right. The flare light reflected off eyes, but wrong. Where an animal's eyes throw back your beam as a smooth point, this threw it back warped, like the reflective layer was scattered through the eye in flakes. It stood just long enough for me to know I was seeing it, and then it bent, and the place where it had been was empty. The whistle started up again, but closer. It had a conversational tone now. Each set of 3 notes felt like it was waiting for an answer. "Get in," Danny said. We crammed into the other truck. Louis drove this time. He dumped it into 4 low and let it crawl, the engine grumbling. I braced the flare against the dash like a torch, stupid and theatrical, but it kept my hands from shaking. We rolled forward to try and push Danny's truck with the bumper. Risky, stupid, desperate. But I think that was the point. We didn't have better. We hit the bumper and the stuck truck shifted, and then something hit the far side. Not like a deer, not glancing, a move. It shoved. The stuck truck slid, the back end bumping against the fence post. I yelled, not words, and Louis threw us into park and jumped out before I could stop him. He didn't go far, just enough to put his shoulder into the stuck truck above the wheel well and lean with everything he had. I piled out and did the same. Jared came behind us with blood seeping through his makeshift bandage and put himself there like the wound didn't matter. Then he rocked the wheel, and the tire caught, and the truck climbed in a gunning scar of slush and snow, and then we were moving, both trucks, nose to tail. We didn't look back. I know people say that and don't mean it. I mean it. We didn't look back. I heard it running along the fence line to our right for a while. Pat, pat, pat. 4 placements that didn't match a body I would know. A slide of something over wood. At the bend in the drive, the whistle followed us. 3 notes chasing the exhaust. At the county road, we hit clear plow lines and enough grit that the tires behaved like tires again. We pointed south toward Casey. The sun was too much. It made my hands look fake on my knees, like they belonged to someone else. No one spoke until we hit the first turnoff toward town. Those old metal signs ticking by on their single bolts. In the gas station, the woman behind the counter took one look at us and said, "Fellas, you look like you tried to fight the wind." Something like that, Danny said. His voice had a crack in it. We cleared Jared up in the bathroom. The cut was exactly as long as his back and clean, like a surgeon's wraparound incision done by someone who didn't know what surgery was. If that doesn't make sense, good. It doesn't make sense to me either. We taped him with gauze and duct tape and told him he'd have a story to tell. He didn't smile. Louis called his friend about the property. I listened to him say no 3 times and then we are out. He didn't explain. I can't blame him. Some things punish telling. We drove straight through Wichita, swapping drivers when eyes went heavy. When I got home, I put my chef's knife on the counter and stared at the nick in the edge that wasn't there before. It was a tiny thing, a bright glint where the steel had chipped. I sharpened it out. I scrubbed the handle until it squeaked. I set it back in the block and couldn't touch it for a week. You'll tell me what we saw was a name. I know what word people use. I'm not going to write it here again. I'm not going to pretend I know that word's weight. That word lives in a set of stories that aren't mine to unpack. I will tell you this. I had watched those trashy YouTube videos. Yeah, and some of them were jokes, and some were kids scaring each other, and some were bored men with nothing to do on a Thursday night. But threaded through them were details that stuck to my ribs. And when I was standing in a barn in Wyoming, watching something use a body the wrong way, those details woke up and crawled around inside me like mice. Don't answer when it calls you by your own voice. Don't look too long at the eyes. Don't follow it out into the dark. I'd laughed at that once. I don't laugh now. We could have died out there. That's not drama. If Jared had taken that cut an inch deeper, if the truck hadn't found purchase, if we'd opened the door to the woman's voice at midnight. I've gone through my life since then measuring all the little ifs that add up to a man still breathing. You want to know the part that keeps me from sleep? It isn't the scream or the way it tore wood like wet paper. It's the way it played, the way it put a shirt where we'd see it and made the tracks dance, the way it knocked politely on the top third of the door, using a human's habit like a tool. Intelligence is worse than hunger. Hunger you can feed or flee. Intelligence can wait. We tried to help each other. We did. I'll hold that like a heat in my chest when the bad cold rolls in at 3 a.m. We didn't leave anyone behind. We made a human knot and we moved as one. That counts. If there's a way to handle a thing like that, it wasn't a prayer or a charm for us. It was 4 men putting hands to work and not breaking when the world got strange. If you ever find yourself on a winter ranch in that wide, white state, and you hear someone you love call your name from just beyond the cottonwoods, don't answer. Don't be polite. Don't step onto the porch because you think your heart can be trusted. Your heart will get you killed. And if you think this is all nonsense dreamed up by a guy who welded too long in cold air and got high on his own beam stew, that's fine. I hope you're right. I hope there's a version of this world where that barn was empty and we scared ourselves with our own breath. But if you drive north of Casey and see a sign with bullet holes punched through a family name and a frozen stock tank with a windmill that doesn't spin, and if you feel a whistle ride your spine that isn't wind and isn't bird and isn't human, turn around. Let some places stay empty. Let some voices go unanswered. That's my advice. That's my warning. And that's all I have in me tonight.